Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public debate on Britain's membership of the European Union, which has been organised by the University of Derby and Universities UK. And a special welcome to those of you who are watching this live on the internet, either on YouTube or through the University of Derby website. My name's Neil White. I'm the editor of the Derby Telegraph, and I'll be your MC for the evening. I have a particular fascination for tonight's debate because I'm a European Studies graduate, and as part of my degree, I lived in Germany for a year. Of course, those were the days of the mark rather than the euro. I've written in my Derby Telegraph column recently about the 1975 referendum and was interested to read Dame Margaret Beckett musing on it in my paper today. It was interesting that she focused on the economic arguments. Those and concerns over immigration have been central to much of the discussion so far. However, our readers have also raised important issues surrounding political and judicial power, or sovereignty as Boris Johnson calls it. 20 years ago, Sir James Goldsmith founded the Referendum Party with the sole ambition of putting our European destiny back into the hands of the UK voters. His campaign was seen by some commentators as a bit of a joke. 18 years after his death, his wish is to become a reality. So how will it go? Perhaps you will be clearer after hearing the words of our distinguished panel tonight. Professor Catherine Mitchell, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Derby, will be chairing the debate tonight. She's going to be joined by Nigel Baxter, the East Midlands Chair of Business for Britain. Dame Margaret Beckett MP, who we're told is having a surgery at the moment, and is going to be joining us shortly. Roger Helmer MEP for the East Midlands, and Patrick McLoughlin, the Transport Secretary. Let's give them a warm welcome. So we want to make this an interactive evening, so we'll start the debate with an audience poll. There's nothing like a good poll, to see what you think about the European Union. So at this stage, we'd like to know if you are leaning towards remain, leave, or if you're undecided. So, we've got counters around the room, I'm told. Please raise your hands if you want to remain in Europe. Not you, Catherine.
No, I was joking.
Keep them up, keep them up. Have we counted? All done? Now would you raise your hands if you'd like to leave Europe? I don't think the UKIP people down the front surprised me an awful lot there. Keep them up. I need the signal to say we finished counting. And number 3, are you undecided? Wow. Well, the panel are really going to be on their persuasive best tonight, aren't they? Okay. I was meant to say, if you're on social media tonight, then you have the opportunity to get involved in the debate by using the hashtag #DerbyEU. That's hashtag Derby and then caps EU. We'd love to see your comments and questions. And of course, we'll take another poll at the end of the debate to see if our panellists have managed to sway any of you. Now, I'm waiting for our results. I'm filling time here. We're meant to have a flash of the results coming up any time. In the next 5 minutes. I'm looking hopefully around. I'll fill time. Is there a song you want or dance routine? I'm going to Cannes next week, by the way, so that will be interesting. That's right smack in the middle of Europe, and I'm going to be championing the cause of Derby in Cannes at the MIPIM show. That's the big property show there, and it will be very, very interesting to see what the Europeans make of the whole UK debate, won't it? And there he says, padding more and more and more. And shall I just hand over to Catherine?
Are we nearly there?
Nearly there.
Nearly there.
1 minute, okay. Jeremy is beavering away. Pardon? This technological world we live in now, Alan. I hope none of you are affected by the water problems, by the way, in South Derbyshire today.
There it was.
We got it, we got 'em.
Almost there.
Oh. I didn't spot that.
There's only one result that matters.
And there you go, it's a pie chart.
Oh, God.
Goodness me. Amazing.
So, without my glasses, I can see that it says leave 38%, remain 37%, undecided 25%. Wow, that's going to be tight, isn't it, if that's reflected across country? So, we'll take another poll at the end of the debate, and I'm sure it'll be sprightly. But now let me hand over to Professor Catherine Mitchell so we can begin the discussion. Catherine.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, it's a great privilege for the university to be chairing this evening. And what we really want is a good debate where we get clear messages and that we can allow the panel members to actually answer your questions clearly so that we can make the right decisions in June. So what I would just like to start with is just to say that the way we're going to work this evening is I'm going to ask the panellists in a moment to just give their view of the European Union, or their outline their view of the European Union in 1 minute. So they've only got 1 minute to tell you that. We're then going to go to questions. Some people have submitted those questions, and so we'll be going out to the audience for people to ask that question. But we will also be going out to open for questions within the room as well. And I'll also be asking some questions as the chair of the panel. So I'm going to start now by asking Patrick in 1 minute to give his views.
Right, in 1 minute, whether we leave the EU or not, the EU is still going to be there. It isn't the EU will disappear if the United Kingdom decides not to vote to be in the European Union. If that exists, I want to be part of those negotiations. I want to be in there involved in fighting for Britain, in making Britain's case. We're told that we're the 5th largest economy. We've been in the European Union for the last 40 years. I don't believe it has held us back. I believe we're stronger for being in Europe. Of course there are things about the European Union that drive me crazy, but they will drive me crazy if we're outside the European Union. There are things like about the United Nations that sometimes drive me crazy, but we don't say we should pull out of the United Nations. We can't leave the world. We're part of the world, and we're part of Europe.
Thank you.
Some questions. Why would we want to tie ourselves to the only major economic area in the world which is in long-term relative decline? Why be in a club that faces existential threats, like the immigration crisis or the euro, which it is totally unable to deal with? Why join a club where we are constantly outvoted, where our laws are made by other people, where we are prevented from making our own trade deals? Why be in a club where damaging policies and regulations lead to the closure of energy-intensive businesses like power stations and refineries and steel mills? Why be in a club where mass immigration can't be controlled and is causing wage compression for low-skilled workers? Why be in a club that makes food and energy and imports more expensive and costs us £55 million a day? Above all, why be in a club that undermines democratic accountability and damages public trust in governance? Brexit is not about isolation or cutting ourselves off or pulling up the drawbridge. It's about rejoining the rest of the world where the growth is and where the opportunities are.
Nigel?
Unlike these other guys, I'm not a politician. I've spent my entire working life based here in the East Midlands and working with European road transport. So I have some great friends in Europe and I understand European business. I started in a position where I hoped that we would be able to reform Europe, and I was desperately hoping that Mr. Cameron would be able to bring back the things that I considered enough to persuade me that we should remain within the European Union. I don't believe that is the case. I think what we have had is very watered down. Some, to paraphrase them, would say it's been very thin gruel. The EU is a failed state. It is undemocratic, and we are not able to properly influence it any longer. In fact, I consider our voice to be relatively unheard within Europe. I'm a person who believes in democracy. I'm a person who believes in sovereignty. But most of all, I'm a person that believes in Great Britain. And I believe that we will be much better served with our own destiny if we vote to leave in June. And I would ask one question of you, myself, before I'm asked questions, no doubt, myself, is if this referendum on the 23rd of June, in the full knowledge of what we know now of the European Union, would you vote to join? And if the answer to that is no, then surely the answer must be to leave. Thank you.
I'm just going to wait now because our other panellist has arrived. I can't sing. Welcome. I think we should give you a round of applause. We're delighted to see you.
Later had an advice bureau.
We saved you a chair.
That's kind. Right.
Can we ask you, having just sat down, to give us a 1-minute review of your view of the European Union staying in or out?
In 1975, I campaigned for us not to stay in the then common market. I felt very strongly about it. I did as much work as I could. And we made plain, those of us who didn't think that we should stay in the common market, we made plain then a lot of the things that people complain about now. For example, we made a point of the fact that there would be circumstances in which the European Court could override British law. We made points about differences in trading, and also we basically took the view, I think, most of us, that these 6 countries, because that's what it was then, these 6 countries are not Europe. An awful lot has changed since then. You're a bit pushed to argue that it's not Europe now, with 28 countries in. We had then alternatives that are not available to us in the same form. We had strong links with the Commonwealth, which, to be blunt, we rather broke. We certainly bent them pretty seriously when we joined the common market. We had trading links with the Scandinavian countries primarily through EFTA. They're pretty well all in the European Union now. So the alternatives we had then are not available to us now. And in 1983, in the general election, I campaigned, as did my party, to say this is our last chance. We've been in the European Union now, or the common market now, for 10 years. Our economy, our society is already becoming very integrated. And if we don't leave now, we will never be able to, because it would be too economically damaging. That was my view then, and it remains my view now. But among the things that have changed is a lot of the opportunities and also the challenges that we face now. For example, things like climate change. For example, the way that international terrorism has developed. These are all issues that we can only deal with successfully in concert with others. So I think being in the European Union now makes sense in a way that it didn't to me in 1975. And that's why I think we should, very strongly, that we should remain.
Thank you. I think what we can now clearly see is the position of each of the panellists in their views of the European Union. So we're going to go out to Roy Webb. What I'd like, are you in the audience, Roy Webb? Hello. If you could put forward your question, and if you want to direct it to someone in particular, then please do.
I'll direct it to the panel. Do you feel the EU has lost its way, changing from a group of trading nations to an unelected political union?
Who would like to take that first?
Well, thank you for the question. Absolutely, I do. We joined a common market. I wish I had £1 for every constituent who said to me, I wanted to join a common market. I didn't want to join this political union. And I believe that it is, as I said in my introductory remarks, it is fundamentally undermining democracy, and it is destroying people's faith in governance, because governance is so remote and we can have so little influence on it that people resent it. But it's also lost its way in its total inability to manage problems. And again, in my introductory remarks, I mentioned the euro crisis, and don't believe for a moment that's gone away. It's just having a pause, it'll be back. We have the immigration crisis, where it was virtually created by Angela Merkel saying anybody who wants to come can come, and now they simply don't know what to do. It is completely dysfunctional, and we need to be able to control our borders before Angela Merkel gives European passports to those million migrants who are there, before the European Union fast-tracks Turkish membership through. And I absolutely disagree with the proposition that we need Europe to protect us from terrorism. We need controlled borders and controlled immigration to protect us from terrorism. That's what we need.
Patrick?
Well, the simple fact is, I come back to what I said right at the beginning. If we come out of Europe, Europe isn't going to disappear. Europe will still be there. We're not going to see a disappearance of all those refugees trying to flee Syria. If anybody was in Syria, you'd try and flee Syria. Look at the conditions of that country. Would anybody here want to stay there? And it's not just Syria. It's Eritrea, it's Afghanistan, it's Iraq. We are seeing a mass movement of people across the borders in Europe. And the idea that if we did not have the sort of agreements that we've got with France, albeit a separate agreement with France, but we get that agreement because we're part of the European Union, because we can face them at European Council meetings, because we can have that access to ministers that might not be so easy to get to, so we can have our border control actually in Calais. If the French wanted to, they could say, you can't have any of your border police at Calais, and the first place they'd be stopping them is at Dover. And what would we do with them then? What would be the answer then? So this idea that somehow we can make the United Kingdom some isolated unit away from the rest of Europe, I think is delusionary. I mean, I'd love it to be the case. I've said before, I'd love us to live in utopia, but when we woke up, we'd find that the EU was still there.
We can send them back under international law.
Okay, Nigel?
Well, the answer to the question, of course, it is exactly that. It is now a political superstate. Where I disagree with Patrick, though, is actually I believe Europe needs us much more than we need them. That we'll have a discussion, I'm sure, later on about trade. The trade imbalance between the EU has changed dramatically, including in the last month, of course. January, the gap has widened. We've virtually double the amount of imports coming in from the EU mainland, if you like, to those that we send out. I know from a transportation background, and to try and get it into perspective for people, that for every articulated truckload, which I think most people would understand, and certainly people will understand today, not that I have any objection to this, by the way, the number of foreign trucks on the road, that there are 3 loads arriving in the UK from mainland Europe to every one that gets out. Half the traffic going out to Scandinavia of ships leaving the UK are empty trailers going back for imports. Going through the Channel Tunnel, it is much the same, and that's an absolute fact. So they need us much more than we need them. And where I disagree with Patrick as well is that I think that what we will see, dependent on the outcome of this referendum, is contagion in Europe. That there are other countries that are waiting in the wings and the public that will seek out to have referendums like ours to try and extract themselves from this political project.
Margaret, do you want to answer this one? Or?
Yeah. No, Roy, I'm afraid I don't think, as I said right at the outset, it's not moved away. Well, let me put it another way around. The risk of it becoming what it's becoming now, which clearly you don't like, was always there. And that risk was made plain before people voted in 1975, and we, the British people, decided to accept that risk. At the time, I was very dismayed. Now, I think, especially the way that things have developed, it is very much in our best interests. But Roger made a passing point about Turkey. But of course, if there is an agreement reached, and it hasn't been reached yet, but if there is an agreement reached for people from Turkey to have greater access, that will be into the Schengen area. We are not in the Schengen area.
They're joining the EU. They will
Yeah,
be
but
able to come anywhere.
no, they will not, Roger. They're joining the Schengen area.
They are now, but they're fast-tracking membership.
Okay.
They're fast-tracking membership, and then they can come to any country in the EU.
Fast-tracking membership, as you know as well as anybody in this room, takes a very, very, very long time.
I guess about 5 years the way they're going.
I doubt it very much.
Okay, thank you for that question. Robert Allen Haven.
Will the Prime Minister's negotiations really make any difference to our relationship with the European Union?
I'm going to start with Margaret this time.
I think they have made some difference, yes. I think he's probably got... With respect to Patrick, I'm no fan of David Cameron's. I know it's a shocking revelation, Patrick, but you'll get over it. But I think he's probably done as good a job as you could in the circumstances. He has got some concessions, he has got some improvements. And it certainly hasn't made anything worse, would be my view. I mean, there are lots of other things about the way the European Union works presently that we would like to change. We'd like to see a different approach to economic policy, which is not sort of austerity-based and making the same mistakes that we think our government is making in this country. So there are plenty of things that we'd like to change. But I can't myself see that anything that Cameron has done has taken us backwards, and that's probably as much as we can expect. There are some concessions, make things a bit better, that's fine, good.
Roger?
Well, the answer is they'll make no difference. You can go through point by point. I won't bore you by doing so, but they will simply not make a scrap of difference, and they may not stick. One of the things you need to understand is that these so-called concessions will come through the European Parliament, and European parliamentarians will vote on them and may not vote in favour. So they're not a done deal in that sense yet. And, for example, his changes to welfare benefits for immigrants, he started out saying we wanted to be in a position to control immigration. Frankly, changing welfare benefits for migrants is pretty trivial. I agree with those who say that most migrants come to work, and many of those will therefore not be getting migrant benefits. So it's a whole list of things. I can bring you news from Brussels, because I've spent all my time there, or spent a lot of my time there. People in Brussels can't believe how successful they've been in absolutely choking off any significant change. The other point to bear in mind is the Lisbon Treaty, which we are signed up to, is in effect a self-amending treaty. Cameron may have taken out the words ever closer union, but it will continue to get closer and closer. There are plans going through the Parliament at the moment for further integration, for further financial integration, and so on, which we will be completely unable to block. We're losing vetoes right, left, and centre. So the answer is it makes no difference. And what you must understand is that the European Union is not a fixed entity, so we can say this is safe, we know what it is, it's not going to change. It is constantly changing. It's rushing helter-skelter towards the United States of Europe, and nothing Cameron has done will change that, I'm afraid.
Any further comments from panel members?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, of course, I think they have made a difference. They've made a difference. And Roger, you will know that once they've been agreed, and if the referendum says that we stay in, then those actual changes come into effect straight away, because they've been agreed by all member states. They'll be lodged at the United Nations. It's as good as an international treaty. It can only be changed if there is unanimity between all the countries which have signed them. So it does come into operation. Yes, of course, the Parliament has a role, but if the Parliament completely ignores the wishes of a country, then I think there will be consequences that flow from that. But as far as the treaties between the heads of government, it is lodged as a UN document, and it has legal force from the day it is lodged.
Only to say I don't believe they have made will make any meaningful difference. I believe our voice is becoming unheard in Europe generally, and we shall see a further erosion of that if we vote to remain in it. Further integration, further loss of sovereignty, further loss of our status as Great Britain.
Okay, I've got one question for the panel, and then we'll go out to the audience. Does the UK's membership of the EU undermine British parliamentary sovereignty? Roger?
Well, of course it does, because we get directives and regulations coming through from the European Union. You can talk to people who are on the European Scrutiny Committee in Westminster. You perhaps know more about this than I do, Patrick. But they complain that they get a stack of documents like that on a Wednesday evening, and they have to approve them on a Thursday morning. So there is no way that they can amend them. There's usually no way they can stop them. For example, they cannot make a decision to deport terrorists and rapists, for example, because it would be contrary to EU law and to the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So, yes, we are no longer a sovereign country. Most of our laws, in fact, come from Brussels.
That's not true.
Okay,
Go,
Margaret.
Margaret.
Yeah, go on, Margaret.
Most of our, it's a favourite UKIP line, I know, but most of our laws do not come from Brussels. The House of Commons Library and a whole lot of other commentators say it's something of the order of 13% of the laws that we pass.
Depends on what you count as
but
laws
of course
and
it
statutory
is.
instruments.
Of course it is the case. If you want, from the day that we joined the common market, we lost some of our sovereignty. That's true when we joined NATO. Yes. It's true when you join the United Nations. When you join international bodies, you are pooling your sovereignty. And I repeat, this was one of the arguments that we had in 1975, and people decided then that this was in our interests. And, perhaps they were prescient. Certainly the way things are now and the way things are going, there is no doubt that is the case. I bow to nobody in my affection for the British Parliament. But the fact is that if we are completely on our own, we can have our sovereignty, but our effectiveness will be much reduced. And all my life in politics, I have believed in trying to do what will take you furthest in the direction of the goal you're trying to reach.
Sorry, can I come back on that one? Because, Margaret is just plain wrong. Organisations like NATO do not involve giving up sovereignty. They involve a sovereign nation making agreements with other sovereign nations. The difference in Europe is you have supranational institutions that pass their own laws. I'm not sure when NATO last passed a law that affected our country.
The Commission can propose legal changes, but it is the Parliament and the Council that decide, and they are politicians.
Well, indeed they are, but if they decide against Britain, then we have no recourse. We have to accept it, and we are outvoted more often than any other member state.
I'm going to ask Patrick now. Patrick.
Well, I think I would partly echo what Margaret has just said, in that signing up to any international treaty can be seen as a way of taking away sovereignty. Of course it can. Actually, NATO is taking away sovereignty, Roger, because it says an attack on one is an attack on all. That's one of the key articles of the NATO agreement. And we sometimes do accept that you lose sovereignty to get more influence. We can't act all the time just as a one nation thinking that's going to bring influence around the world. So where we're talking about some of the environmental changes, where we're looking at what happened with VW on its emissions scandal, then yes, we've got to act across Europe. You can't just act as far as the United Kingdom. And Roger, the idea that somehow coming out of Europe would exclude us from all these regulations in Europe is for the birds. Because we're still going to have to comply by them. If we want to sell, if we want to sell in, I didn't interrupt you. Just calm down. If we want to sell into Europe, we're going to have to abide by all those rules, and we won't have a single word to say in the negotiations. So when our companies want to export, they won't be coming to British ministers to say what's going on. They'll be turning to Europe to say what's going on. How do we comply with the regulations? How can we get our voice heard? You've got one of the biggest employers in Derbyshire, Rolls-Royce, saying that for them it is important for their company that they believe it is right that we stay within the European Union. That's Rolls-Royce. Just think of the engineering excellence we've got here in Derbyshire, along with Toyota, Rolls-Royce, JCB. Those companies cannot escape from European regulations.
Do China and Russia and America obey European regulations? They are the biggest importers into Europe.
Actually, if we're talking about the vehicle emissions, of course, it was the Americans that found out the cheat devices on the VW.
Indeed it was,
and they're having the consequences across Europe as well as the United States. But Roger, I'd love us. I'm sure you've got this great romantic vision.
No, it's not a romantic vision.
Of a
it's
little
practical.
England that is massive, as in the days of the Empire. But life has moved on.
Nigel, have you got anything else to add?
I've almost forgotten the question, to be honest with you.
Okay, right. Any questions from the audience? Okay, if we got a microphone coming down? You sure? Okay. Well, actually, people at the back can't hear.
Can you hear me at the back?
Patrick, you said if we come out of the EU, we still have to play by their rules. If we take that, what Chinese rules does Jaguar Land Rover play by to export?
Can't hear you now.
Yes, no, exactly.
Could someone with a mic repeat the question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick, you said that if we come out of the EU, we still have to play by their rules. So at the moment, China's a great export market for many British companies. What Chinese rules are we playing by? Are we cutting internet access to people, which the Chinese do? Are we oppressing our citizens? What Chinese rules are we playing by to export to them?
I would say this. Are we going to have more influence on China as a European Union or as Great Britain? And as a European Union, I think we have more influence on China than we do solely as Great Britain. You're quite right. We don't live in an ideal world. We don't live in a world where the law that we respect, be it in Europe, be it in the United Kingdom, is necessarily respected or reflected across the rest of the world. Actually, at the moment, for JLR, Jaguar Land Rover, China is a very, very important export market. I want to see those exports, I want to see our country grow. But there is no doubt that one of the reasons why I believe we've seen a lot of inward investment into this country is because of our position within the European Union. One of the reasons why I believe we saw Toyota locate here back in 1986 was because of the access to the European market. I believe those are important factors. Now, I'm not saying that tomorrow that would change, or the day after, if we voted to come out of Europe, that would change. What I am saying is when Toyota come to make long-term investment decisions, they might not look at Britain because they don't see it as influential within the European Union. So long-term, I think that could be very dangerous for investment in this country.
Nissan said they'd leave if we didn't join the euro. Were they right or were they wrong?
Well, what is their long-term... When they make long-term decisions as to where they're going to invest and how long that investment's going to be, I think that is the important point to take into
Toyota has
account.
said that they will not, their decision will not be affected by the Brexit.
They have said that they would not leave. That is certainly true. I'm talking about their long-term investment. When they came here, Roger, in 1986, they did say that it was because of the single market and our involvement within the single market. That's what got the jobs here in the first place. The largest single inward investment ever made by a company just down the road from us.
The most recent statement that Toyota has made, they do say that their decisions about the future, and in particular about future investment, as Patrick says, would be affected by whether or not we were in the EU. And when I was Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, the very first international visit I had to make was to Japan, because the Japanese hadn't had a change of government for 70 years. So they hadn't paid any attention to what the Labour Party was saying because they thought nothing would happen. And they wanted, I saw the very top people of Japanese industry right across the board, the equivalent of the CBI and the individual companies, and every single one of them wanted the message to be understood in this country that if Britain left the European Union, ultimately they would be leaving Britain because they were in Britain and happy to be in Britain and investing for the future in Britain because we were in the EU.
Okay,
Just
I think there was a question over here first, okay? Can we move the microphone? Yes?
We seem to have wandered off the point a little. We appear to be talking about in or out of what is now political union. It's already been said that we've had 2 votes in the past on this. We have not. I was around Margaret when the first vote was taken under Edward Heath. In a later interview, Edward said, "Sorry guys, I misled you. All the time we knew that it would become a state of union, and all the time we knew that you as the people weren't really capable of understanding that, so you would not therefore get the information." Second time round, Wilson, exactly the same. No talk of a European Union, so we have a problem here. Trade, we're all talking about it, fine. We go for trade. Political union, We've never been asked before if that's what we want. We are now going to get that opportunity, so let's talk about it sensibly instead of throwing silly bits about. Thank you.
I'm sorry to have to disagree with you, sir, but I'm afraid you are mistaken. There was only ever one vote. There was only ever one vote. One of the reasons why, only one vote for the British people to take, which I understood you to be referring to. And one of the reasons why we in the Labour Party had a referendum in 1975 was because I'm afraid that Mr. Heath had said that yes, he wanted us to join the European Union, but he would not do so without a decision of Parliament and or people. And he didn't do that. He didn't do that. And so that's why we had the referendum in 1975, and that's why people like me were able to argue that, you know, you were not consulted about this decision, you the people. So we've only ever really had one vote. But the point is, we did make that decision then, and we have an opportunity now to reconsider.
Okay, I'm going to take one more comment from the panel, and then we'll go to the next question.
Well, I just want to, I partly meet you part of the way. I think one of the problems that has been made over a number of years is that Europe has moved faster than what the people have wanted to move. And I do believe that it is right in future, and there is now a law on the statute book which has been sort of accepted by both of the major parties that said that any future treaty change which comes about, which has a direct effect on the United Kingdom, would be subject to a prior referendum before it was approved. And I think one of the problems has been that too many treaties have been accepted and not actually had a popular vote of the British people. So that is something that is put right, and so should there be any future treaty changes which affects the United Kingdom, they could only take place prior to after a referendum in the United Kingdom. It is any change. Any constitutional change.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the front, and then we're going to take some of the questions that have been submitted. But we've got lots of time for questions. Okay.
Yeah, Patrick, you mentioned about Toyota and Rolls-Royce. Now, do you think it's right that these companies are actually saying to their employees, if you vote to come out of Europe, you're going to lose your jobs? I had a chap talk to me the other day and said, I'd love to vote to come out of Europe, but Toyota's told us that if we vote to come out, then they're going to leave. Now, the reason you're quite right about Toyota being central parts of Europe and all that, but they also came because Derby gave them a very good incentive to come. So what's your answer to that?
Well,
It's blackmail, the way I see it.
I think my answer is very... Look, I mean, Rolls-Royce's statement is very straightforward. I've got it here in front of me. It says, the EU referendum question is a political decision for the citizens of the United Kingdom. However, any uncertainty or unsettling for business as it limits a company's ability to plan and budget for the future. Rolls-Royce believes that our customer, supply chain and employees benefit from the UK's membership of the EU. Rolls-Royce therefore believes that it is in the company's interest for the UK to remain a member of the EU, and we support any reforms to make the EU more competitive. I do think a company that relies on exports, that exports around the world, yes, of course they have a right to tell its employees, if they stayed silent and suddenly had to lose jobs or not win competition, people would say, why didn't you say this when the referendum was taking place? So they have a right to say it, and I defend that right for them to say it. And I think they'd be derelict in their duty if they thought, it's not my words, it's their words, if they thought that something that was a question to the United Kingdom, they didn't give a view.
I think Rolls-Royce brings us
in the world.
And in the world. And you would hopefully admit there is a world we can
Yes.
not just Europe. Rolls-Royce alone, BMW.
Okay.
I don't think Rolls-Royce owned BMW.
Yeah, okay.
May I comment on this one? Can we just go back to the Toyota case, because the Japanese car manufacturers were absolutely clear that we ought to join the euro. They've now had the experience of seeing what's happened to the euro, and I think they recognise that their advice at that time was wrong. I suspect their advice at this time is wrong too. But what I would say to you, and again, drawing on my experience of Brussels, I see these large multinational companies coming to Brussels, coming to the Commission, to seek for various changes and different aspects of law, the Commission has an enormous amount of patronage. Now, I'm not saying that Rolls-Royce are being dishonest, but I am saying that if Rolls-Royce came out and said, we don't mind, yes, by all means vote to leave, the next time their lobbyists walk through the door of the Commission on some issue to do with emission noise or whatever, they would get a very, very frosty reception. I don't think we should underestimate the patronage power that the Commission has acquired because it is making these laws and it is imposing regulations on large companies.
But Roger, you talked about the euro. We are not in the euro. We have the advantage of being in the European Union without being in the euro. I don't see the United Kingdom ever joining the euro.
I didn't say that. I'm saying that Toyota can now see that the euro has been a disaster, so they will know that the advice they gave 15 years ago was mistaken.
We took a sovereign decision. You know, this sovereignty that you keep telling us is so important.
Okay,
We took a sovereign
because
decision.
we've got lots of questions in the audience. Okay, Gaurav Pandey, if I've said that correctly.
That's me.
Okay, sorry. Did I say it incorrectly?
Oh, no, that's good.
Okay.
Does the UK have enough resources to deal with unlimited borderless immigration?
Okay, I'm going to start with Nigel.
I think it's very clear that we don't have the resources to do it, and that's a major factor and will be a major factor in the determination of this vote. We are putting huge pressure on our hospitals, we're putting huge pressure on our schools and other infrastructure. And of course, a lot of things that we should think about is the cost of the EU in this, the cost of the membership of the EU in this, £350 million a week sent to Brussels, enough to build a new hospital, the same price as the hospital that was built here in Derby a few years ago. So I think that's a major issue. We will focus on here on sovereignty. We may even focus on here on trade. Massively important issues, completely agree. But there is, I think, an underlying sentiment in this country and a great concern about our control of our borders and our control of immigration in the sense that we are feeling overwhelmed, and that will be a major part in how this referendum is decided.
Margaret?
We don't have unlimited immigration now. But if what I suspect you mean is that we have to have free movement of labour within the European Union, and that's the part of immigration that you're referring to as unlimited, it's a very simple trade-off. If we want to be in the single market and to have unfettered free trade with Europe, we have to accept the rest of the rules, and part of that is free trade. I heard earlier today that apparently Boris Johnson was saying what we want is a deal like Canada's. Well, as I understand it, apart from the fact that it took 7 years to negotiate and it isn't settled yet, isn't in place yet, one of the consequences of one of the inputs in that Canadian deal is that there are particular companies and industries that if they want to trade into Europe, they have to accept European rules, regulations, and so on. And one of the things that those who want us to leave Europe really do play down very unjustifiably is that if we want the trading opportunities, we have to have free movement of labour. I completely understand some of the reservations, although I have to say a lot of the evidence, the independent financial evidence, is that actually we benefit substantially financially from immigration. But I know that that doesn't help with some of the other arguments and concerns. But all I would simply say is it's part of the deal. And I think very few people want to accept or acknowledge that if we leave the single market, we leave the European Union, we break those trading links, we are embarking into some kind of black hole economically. And, you know, that is really something that people have to take seriously.
Margaret says we don't have unlimited immigration. Well, we have unlimited immigration by available for 500 million European citizens, which seems to me to be quite a number. So far as Canada is concerned, I think Margaret is conflating two things. In any international trading situation, if you want to sell from company A to company B, you have to make sure that your product meets the product requirements, just the product requirements, of company B. Of course you do, but that means if we want to sell fridges to America or cars to China or tractors to India, we have to obey the domestic laws of the country we're shipping to. What we do not have to do is to obey all the laws on employment, environment, everything else of India because we want to trade with India, nor does Canada in order to trade with the EU. There are countries all around the world which trade with the EU, are not subject to these arrangements, and by the way, there is no other free trade area in the world that has a free movement condition. So this idea that free trade requires free movement is frankly an absurdity. And there are arguments about whether immigration is good or bad economically, but what is absolutely clear is if we could have something like an Australian points system where we could select the people we let into our country based on the skills that our industry needs, that would be a better economic proposition than simply opening the doors and letting all Europeans come, skilled or unskilled.
What do you think, Patrick?
Well, you say, Roger, 500 million Europeans could come to this country at any one stage. I don't think they will, you know.
No, but lots do. Millions do.
Lots do, and lots of this country, a lot of people in this country go travelling throughout Europe and have the freedom to travel out of Europe. And the simple fact is as well, some of the countries that you refer to have to have the free movement to be able to enter the single market and to compete in the single market. And I think that would undoubtedly be a if we were to pull out, there is no way, I don't think, that we wouldn't be required to have the freedom of movement of people to remain part of the single market. Do you, Roger, believe that remaining a part of the single market is very important for the United Kingdom?
I don't know what you mean by the single market in that context. What is important is that we have a free trade deal, like the one which is being negotiated with Canada. It's a perfectly fair comparison, and it won't take 7 years if we're negotiating and not the Commission. Let me ask you a question. What we will have is a free trade deal which will ensure that Toyota and Nissan have market access, that the supply chains which extend across the continent can still operate, but we will not be subject to free movement. We will not be subject to all these conditions. And if Patrick is going to say Brussels will insist on free movement, let's go back to the earlier point of the discussion. We buy nearly twice as much from them as they buy from us. They need us more than we need them. They will agree to a free trade deal. And if the Commission drags its feet, I tell you what, the captains of industry, the people who run Mercedes and Audi and BMW, will be kicking the door down in the Commission to get that free trade deal in place.
Canadian car companies have to face now, or will have to face, if this agreement is ever implemented, a 10% tariff barrier.
Well, it's not a free trade deal, is it?
Roger, you've got to get your facts right.
It's the best they could get.
Sorry, Molly.
He says it's not a free trade. I think it's the best they could get.
Well, let's also get your facts right, Roger, because a few minutes ago you were telling us how the captains of industry go into Brussels and do everything they can to lobby Brussels. Okay. Now you're just telling me that the captains of industry, if they're the captains of German industry, will turn around to the Commission and tell them and ignore them. I don't think so somehow. I think that you've just contradicted yourself. And the other point is this. You say, like the Canadians, it has taken 7 years. By the way, Canada, I think, is over 3,500 miles away. We're talking about a country 22 miles.
Makes it more difficult
22 miles away from our borders. Not 3,000 miles away, not over the other side of the Atlantic. We're talking about our neighbours. Yes. We're talking about a part of Europe that we're part of. Is it, you know, the Times headline of Europe being cut off from England by fog is for the past. We live in a nation that relies.
I'm going to move us on to a question in the audience. Okay, over there in the corner.
Very simple question, this, which is, if we leave the EU, what are the tariffs we're going to face for our exporters? And that's a factual question.
Can I address that one? I've been doing some work on that recently. And I would particularly criticise David Cameron because he today was quoting tariffs from before we joined with the implication that we might face similar tariffs if we left. In fact, the worst case that could possibly occur, the safety net when we leave, would be WTO terms. And the average tariffs on goods exported from Britain to Europe would be of the order of 2 to 3%. If you work out what those tariffs would amount to, in fact, on our current volume of exports, it's about £4 billion a year. That compares to about £10 billion a year, which is the net cost of membership. So I hope that gives some sort of perspective. But of course, that is the worst case. That is the safety net. In fact, I am absolutely confident, despite what Patrick says, that we will get a free trade deal because we are in a much stronger position than Canada, much nearer position than Canada. We will be the largest customer of the EU in the world, bar none, and the largest net customer. They will be crying out to have a free trade deal. Therefore, the tariffs we will face will be zero.
I think a lot of this is quite misplaced. I know there's a great deal of talk about the relative balance of our exports to Europe and their exports to us. We export something close to 50%. Something close to 50% of our exports go to Europe. All right, I'll give you the figures. It's 40%. It's about 6% that come from them to us. It's a much bigger proportion of our GDP that goes in trade with Europe than it is the other way around. So I think this argument that the balance of advantage in such negotiations would be with us is profoundly misplaced and profoundly misjudged. The balance of advantage is the other way.
You don't pay bills with
I'm going to let
percentages.
Nigel come in and then I'll come back to you, Patrick. Nigel?
I don't really understand the tariff argument. I agree entirely with Roger. There is no sense or reason. We have a vested interest on both sides of the channel and otherwise to set up a free trade agreement, and I don't really understand why that would be so difficult, so complex, why we're talking about 7 years or 10 years to set these things up. I've come from a background in business where I want to make an arrangement with somebody. It's pretty damn simple. I get on an aeroplane and go and make it. That's what we do. It doesn't take 10 years to do it unless we want to make it last 10 years. I work today with a European truck manufacturer, and indeed all trucks, bar a handful, are manufactured in mainland Europe. And the market for those trucks in the UK is circa 50,000 per annum. There's roughly £500 million worth of parts business between those coming in there. Some of those parts manufactured in the UK going to Europe, some of those parts manufactured in Europe, of course, and coming to here. Where is the possible advantage in setting up tariffs to corrupt that situation? That business will continue. I am absolutely confident. I've had conversations with the people that I work with. I don't feel any vibe from them that it will pose to us a massive difficulty, and I'm sure that will be the case.
Patrick?
Well, you're seeing other countries like Norway, which aren't part of the European Union, that do have to pay a lot of the same per head that we pay as members of the European Union to have access. They have to allow open access as well to their borders of people, the freedom of movement. That is a fact. The idea that, Roger, that we're somehow going to come out of Europe and then somehow they're going to bend over backwards to give us a better deal than we had when we were members of the European Union, I think is living in cloud cuckoo land. That is a simple fact. I mean, the truth of the matter is the size of the economy of the United Kingdom is $2.9 billion. You know, the size of Europe without us in there is $15.5 billion. And the EU with us as members is an $18.5 billion as far as size. And when you talk about the negotiations with other countries, you're not talking about you're talking about the exports that we do to 27 countries. And my point is the jobs that we've got in this country as one country, as opposed to the 27 countries that are those that are over
5 million jobs on the continent
that are over reliant on the position.
Norway is a red herring.
Okay, we're just going to take one question. The gentleman in the orange jacket.
We don't want that sort of deal. We don't want to be Switzerland.
I'm sure you don't.
You might get it, though.
No, they've agreed to their terms. We would not agree to those terms.
Of
course they agreed to those terms.
Okay.
I would like to ask a question, really more of a contrast. Looking at the EEC of 1973 and the EU of 2016, when we joined the EEC in 1973, we were a small group of similar trading nations with similar living standards, and therefore it seemed like a good idea at the time. What we've got now, in addition to the trading, is a large political union which seems to be ever expanding, which we've got little or no control on. And that is my big concern. What we have now is not what we originally started off with in 1973. So therefore, come the referendum in June, I think it's really important that people think this through and look at what we had and what we've got now and whether it really is a good idea, which personally I don't think is such a good
Can I
idea.
ask
If I could come back, sir, to the point I made at the beginning. You're absolutely right about that. And in 1973, there were a lot of other countries in a similar position to us. We would not have been on our own if we had not gone into the EEC. That's not the position now. We've weakened our links with the Commonwealth, whose trade deals are with the European Union. All those other countries around us with whom we had good and close relationships, they're all in the European Union. If we leave, we'll be leaving them all behind.
Well, yes, I don't disagree with that, but what my concern is that, as I said a minute ago, we've got little or no control in the way things are going. We've got Turkey waiting in the wings to come in. From what I understand, they're wanting to be fast-tracked into the EU because of what they're doing with regard to the migration situation. So it's a big concern for me. Originally, in 1973, we didn't have, the single market didn't start till 1193. So we didn't have all of that. And at the time, as far as trade was concerned, it was good. But now this country seems to have very little control of its own laws, and what laws we do make has to mirror what goes on in Brussels.
Okay, can we just answer that question now?
Can I respond to that? I think you've raised a critically important point. When it was just 6 countries, or a few more, all of similar sort of economic development, then you could live with free movement because there wasn't a big pull factor from one place to another place. Once we started bringing in Romania and Bulgaria and Croatia and maybe Turkey down the track, suddenly you've got massive differentials. You've got average wages something like 7 or 8 times as high in Britain as you have in those countries. And there are various other reasons why Britain is often more attractive than Germany or France. And therefore, you have this problem. I think it was Milton Friedman who said, you can have a welfare system or you can have open borders. You cannot have both. And what we are trying to do is to have both. A huge differential of wages, far superior welfare systems. Of course those people, I don't blame them for wanting to come. Of course they want to come. But there are limits to how many we can take. And that is a vital point, that we've totally changed the character of the relationship because we've brought countries in that are at a very different level of economic development. So you're right, we need to think again and take that into account.
You're quite right. It's a lot different to 1973. Poland is no longer under Soviet leadership. East Germany is no longer under the Soviet control. Europe has changed. Very definitely it's changed. I think it's changed for the better. I think it's changed for the stronger. I think those countries that lived under Soviet tyranny have now got their freedom and they're part of the European Union. And I welcome that and I'm delighted about it because I think it actually makes Europe a safer place and a better place. And I want to see those countries being able to expand. I want to see them part of a free movement of market. Yes, the world has changed and it's going to carry on changing. And it's not going to get small. In a way, it is going to get a smaller world because the digital revolution that's coming, computers, the internet, that is changing our lifestyle. It's changing their lifestyle. The internet has changed the way in which news travels around the world. And that's why we're seeing some of the problems we're seeing with people leaving countries like Syria, coming to Europe because they think it is a safer area to be than the place they grow in. Yeah, and sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable. But we're not going to turn that back. Well, I don't want us to turn that back. President Putin would possibly like us to turn it back. And there's one person who will be very pleased if we pull out of the European Union, and that's President Putin, because he'll see it for the first time as Europe starting to split. So yes, it comes. Yes, it does come with problems, the European Union. But, we're big enough. We're strong enough. We're secure enough and we're grown enough to be part of it.
Okay, I'm going to be a bit selfish now because actually this event is funded or part organised through Universities UK. So what we do know is that the UK universities do disproportionately well from EU funding for research and actually enables world-class research to go on in our universities. Can you tell me a vote to leave would not undermine the success of British universities?
it's crystal clear, and that's what all the universities are saying. That it's quite. There are plenty of people who say, "Oh, what do we ever get out of being in the European Union?" This is part of what we get out of being in the European Union. There are other aspects where we benefit as well as contribute, but this is one of the crucial ones. And economically, socially, technologically, for the benefit of humankind, if you like. One of the best things that we can do is to have world-class, world-level science, technology, innovation, research, and that benefits enormously from the funding that we get, from the common funds that we all contribute to in the European Union, and from the access and from the trade-off of ideas between individuals, because we're part of that network.
Well, we had a trade-off of ideas between European universities in the Middle Ages, so you don't need the European Union to achieve that. What we need to understand, it's not stupid, it's a fact. Go and read some history. What we've got to understand is that there is no European money. It is our money. It's all come from this country. And every pound we get back in European funding costs the British economy about £3. And if Turkey joins, being a very large, very poor country, lots more of the European funding will move to the east, and that ratio can only get worse. Now, we hear this from academics. We need the money from Europe. We hear it from the farmers. What will happen to our CAP checks? The fact is, when we leave, we will have much more money available to do the good things we want to do. Now, I don't know who's going to be in government after the referendum, because there may be quite a lot of changes then, I should think. So I can't guarantee you that the British government in 5 years' time after Brexit will necessarily give the same funding or more funding, but it will be in a position to do so, and I'm sure if we understand the importance of funding for universities, then the British government will as well.
Nigel?
I echo Roger's points, really. For me, I don't really understand this idea of European money. We are sending our money to Europe, and they're sending some of it back. I'm a farmer as well as involved in the truck business, and I'm a beneficiary of the money that is coming back from the CAP. So I understand it completely. Farming's in a difficult place. I know we're talking about education. But we send them £3, they send us £1 back. We're supposed to be grateful for it. And now they're asking us to put signs up to say that we've received it. I mean, it's just nonsense. And this is the same with education, I'm sure. I'm not an expert on it at all, but I'm sure it's exactly the same. We're sending them our money, getting some of it back, and being told that it's somehow or another it's a fund that we should be grateful to receive.
Patrick?
Engineering and science is all about our future. We've had a great history, a great tradition. You've only got to look at what Stephen Hawking has said in today's Times, as followed by another 120, I think it is, scientists, saying that in their belief that our membership of the European Union does us well for science and for academia in this country. I believe that is true. I believe the exchanges that I see between universities, not just here in Derby, but across the rest of the country, is of fundamental importance. Developing the new technologies of tomorrow is something that you don't do alone. You do it through collaboration with other countries. That's what we're doing with our engineering projects. I think it's more of the reasons why not to take a giant gamble. And that's what leaving the European Union would be. It would be a gamble. And it would be a gamble, I think, that we don't know what the consequences would be. And there would be a period of instability. And during that period of instability, the United Kingdom could lose out in the long term.
What about the consequences of staying in, Patrick?
Okay, well, that's what we're debating. Okay, can I just ask Helen Eleftheriou? Oh, hi.
How would a British exit impact on our ability to attract top talent into already difficult to recruit vacancies?
In a particular industry or generally?
Nigel.
One of the things that concerns me about our immigration policy at the moment is in order to try and balance the books in terms of numbers, we are discriminatory against a number of countries outside the EU. So we make it's more difficult to bring top talent in. We cannot easily bring people in from India and so on. There's a huge wealth of computer experts and so on and so forth into the UK because we have to keep a gap to receive somebody that has the rights of free movement. That is not the way to promote excellence in the UK. What we need to do, in my view, is to take back control of our borders and take back control of who and comes into this country and indeed who leaves this country. We should know who's here for all sorts of reasons, not just from a talent perspective.
Margaret?
I think it's unfortunate, but I suppose it's inevitable given the way that the argument has been going, particularly from some on the panel for a very long time. That so much of this debate is about movement of people, and it is underneath or explicitly about immigration. And the more we look like a sour, resentful group of people, and that's not to dispute the fact that I completely understand there is nothing that I hate more than the idea that people will be brought in as cheap labour to undercut the wages and conditions of our own workforce, wherever our own workforce originated. I think that's terrible, and we should put a stop to it. And we should be working with the European Union to help to make sure that doesn't happen. But nothing will more harm our opportunities to attract top talent than the perception that we are a mean group of people who just want to close in on ourselves and tell everybody else in the world to push off. And that, I'm afraid, is the kind of message that I feel from the sourness of so many of the things that are said in the context of this debate.
Margaret, that is an absolute travesty of the Leave side's position on immigration. I wonder if you read the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, today, who said it was outrageous to criticise people as racist merely because they were concerned about immigration.
I didn't say anything about
No, that was what you implied.
No, I didn't.
Nasty, sour group of people. We know what you meant.
Didn't.
It's coded language.
No, what? I beg your pardon. How dare you?
I dare very easily. The point is, and if I can pick up Nigel's point, because he's absolutely right, we have a policy today which, in effect, if not in intention, is a racist policy, because we favour Europeans who are, broadly speaking, white, and we therefore clamp down on non-Europeans, many of whom are from the Commonwealth and from ethnic minorities. Now, I would much rather have an Indian software engineer or an Indian dentist than an unskilled Croatian, frankly. And we should be selecting the people we let into our country. But that's not racist at all. How is it racist to want to allow people in without checking their ethnicity? Well, I think you should wait for the chairman to call you.
Okay. Can we just stop at this point? Okay, I'm just going to ask Patrick if you've got a comment on this question, and we'll move on if not.
I think we will be we do attract top scientists and top researchers to this country. It's important that we continue to do that. To do that, we've got to be at the leading edge with our universities and our engineering companies to see cooperation right across the European Union. And we're seeing it much more with science, and we're seeing it with engineering as well.
Why not right across the board?
Okay, gentleman in the blue over there. Sorry, is there anyone on this side I keep missing? Okay, we'll come to you next, okay?
I was in the Royal Navy for 22 years. I fought in 4 conflicts: Mozambique, Aden, Borneo and the Falklands. Part of that conflict was to restore democracy in those countries. When I come home, I vote for a Member of Parliament to pass laws that I would like. Faceless wonders in Brussels, whose names I can't pronounce, who I've never voted for, then turn round to my government and tell them you can't pass those laws because they don't come within the parameters of the laws of Europe. Where's my democracy? Where's my sovereign democratic right?
We'll start with Patrick and then we'll move along, okay?
Well, I just point to you, so you say you were in the Royal Navy and distinguished service in the Royal Navy. We naturally sign up to the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. It is a United Nations body. It is the operator of the laws of the sea. We don't say that somehow by signing up to the IMO and abiding by what the IMO wants us to do, that somehow is an attack on sovereignty. It's actually making sure that we've got safe shipping around the world because it's an international organisation. The same is true of ICAO, which is the international organisation for aviation. You know, we don't say somehow because ICAO say we've got to do something, that somehow is an attack on our sovereignty. If we join any international organisation, there will be occasions when we give up some sort of sovereignty because it's in our interest to do so, because it makes the world safer, because it makes flying safer, because it makes travel by sea safer. So I think one's got to be realistic about what we talk about when we talk about sovereignty. I agree with what Margaret was saying a little while ago about the amount of regulations, which, yes, some of them are Brussels-based, but if they weren't Brussels-based, we might find there were other international obligations that we've got from other international bodies. So I believe very much in sovereignty. I think it is absolutely important. But, you know, we're being sovereign. We're giving you it's a sovereign choice as to whether we have a referendum or not. You're getting one.
Patrick, of course.
When we've had that referendum, whether we're in or we're out, we must, like you said earlier, even if we go out, there are certain parts of the laws of the European Union we will still have to abide by.
But that's
although I vote for my parliament to pass the laws I vote, they can still turn around and say, no, you can't.
But it's part of the world we live in. I'd like to live
it's
in.
not the part of the world I want
Well,
to
I'm
live
afraid it is, sir. I'm afraid if you're a merchant seaman, you'd be very.
Let's go into the unknown then.
If you're a merchant seaman, you'd be very pleased with the International Maritime Organisation setting down those regulations.
We were great. We can still be great.
Excuse me, may I reply to your question? Patrick is the Transport Minister. He has given you a couple of examples about the Maritime Organisation and the flight. Yeah, okay. That is comparable in a larger scale to observing traffic lights, the rules of the road. I'm very happy to observe traffic lights most of the time because I believe it keeps everybody safe. But I don't regard observing traffic lights as an infringement on my sovereignty. It's just common sense. When there is a supranational organisation in a foreign country over which we have no control and little influence, which can pass a whole ream of laws about just about every aspect of our trade, our work, our health, our education, all those things, that is a loss of sovereignty. We cannot make those laws. Europe is constantly making decisions that should be left to the member states. And so I agree with your question.
Okay, can I just ask Margaret to speak? And we've got lots of questions in the audience, so I'm going to ask one question and one answer soon. Margaret, just to complete.
Just briefly, if I may, for the first time, actually, I had a smidgen of sympathy with a remark that Roger just made, because, yes, there are times when all of us say, why on earth are they saying, well, you know, let's make a decision about this? Why do they want to meddle in that? That happens. But you're getting, if I may say so, sir, a wrong impression. Yes, it is true that sometimes the unelected bureaucrats that we all talk about make proposals for law, but in the end, if decisions are made about changes in the law, those decisions are made by a combination of the elected European Parliament and of the Council of Ministers, all of whom are elected politicians from their governments. And we're all guilty, the parliamentarians and also governments of every shade in this country, we're all guilty of saying, oh, well, we had to do that because of Europe, when we don't really want to cough up to the fact that actually we agreed to that, because in the end we decided that was the best bargain we could get, or that was in our national interest. And so a lot of people get the impression that Europe tells us what, no. We decide what we go along with and what we don't go along with.
Okay, I'm going to take, there's lots of questions in the room. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, to the gentleman over here.
Thank you. Further to the last questioner, Roger Helmer, you've really encapsulated it. Two words have come from the panel, from you people this evening, over the last few moments, and that's freedom and gamble. Now, I would like to know, Margaret Beckett and Patrick McLoughlin, what gives you, and I say this with respect, what gives you the right to gamble with the UK freedom, which has been 1,000+ years in the development? I'm a UK citizen, and I have the privilege, not granted to many nations of the world, to decide what powers to lend to the government of this land. And if I don't like what they do with it, I can vote them out. I'm free.
Okay,
the Council of Ministers, however, they decide what freedoms their subjects can have. I want to know why you can gamble with that freedom.
Okay, very quick answers from both of you.
The British people made that choice. They made it in 1975. I regretted it then. I no longer regret it. But it was the people of the sovereign people of this country who chose to make us part of this organisation, and it has now developed, as indeed many of us said at the time it was bound to do.
Patrick?
I think Margaret's answered it.
Okay, right. Okay, I think the lady at the front here has been waiting probably all evening, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to start with a quick word to the audience. I can't help but note that I think I'm the 13th person that's spoken and the second woman. And if anything, we may disagree, but this is about our future. We haven't heard from anyone younger. We haven't heard from a big variation of people. So please, speak up, put your hands up. Let's start hearing from all of the people that this affects, because it affects all of us. And now my question is to Roger. I am wearing a T-shirt because, frankly, I got fed up of hearing Nigel Farage tell me that he wants the model to be Switzerland, and then to hear Carswell say it should be Norway, and then to hear you say it should be Canada, and then to hear someone else say it should be South Korea, and then Vanuatu, and then it should be Canada again. Why can't you tell me, officially, on behalf of the Out campaign, which country do you want our relationship with Europe to look like, and why can't you agree?
Well, we are a diverse group of people, as I may say those who wish to remain in are a diverse group of people. We've got a Tory one side and a Labour member the other side, and I'm sure we could find nuances of difference between them. What we want is Britain to be independent, sovereign, democratic, and to strike its own trade deals with the European Union and with other countries around the world. Now, there are people on the Leave side who say we should look at the EEA as a model, we should look at EFTA as a model. There are very few people now who say we should actually look at Norway and Switzerland as a model, because most of the things we want to get rid of, they are stuck with. But I think the clear answer to your question is we want to be an independent nation. And to those who say, we're not big enough to be an independent nation, I still hear that now and again. Somebody once said we'd be like Puerto Rico. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. I believe we have the 4th largest armed forces in the world, even run down as they are. We're part of the G7, we're part of the G20. All this business about by ourselves, Margaret likes to keep saying by ourselves. We're on the UN, no, absolutely not. We're on the UN Security Council, the World Bank, the WTO, the OECD, all these organizations. We are one of the most globally connected countries in the world. And for people to come and tell us that we will be isolated if we don't agree to be governed by foreign institutions in Brussels is frankly a travesty.
Okay, I'm going to go to the young gentleman. We've got very little time left, so going to some young people, because people have started putting their hands up now. Okay.
So, the European Union's origins lie in the agreements made between France and Germany in the 1950s. Yeah. Before that, Europe bled for centuries. Wars crippled it. And for the sake of having 13% of our laws being made in Brussels, with the rest of them retaining sovereignty here, is that not worth the price of peace in Europe?
Nigel, do you want to take that?
Well, I think there's clearly been some good things that have come out of the EU, and bringing some of those communist countries back into a more civilised way of life is much better. And I'm accepting that communism is not what I would class as civilised. Peace has been maintained in this country really by NATO, in my view, and the peace around the world has been maintained by NATO. Europe is not in itself particularly strong militarily in many respects. Britain, of course, as Roger has said, is one of the remaining powers. And I don't accept that the legislation issue that you bring to it is a price worth paying, because I believe that NATO is the real force that is controlling peace in the world.
Okay, Patrick, because we're going to try and get as many questions in now. Okay, Patrick.
I completely agree with what you've just said, but I also want to be unusual tonight and just agree with what Roger's just said, because I think Roger was right. We are a member of the UN Security Council, one of the 5 permanent members. We are a member of the Commonwealth. We are one of the leading countries as economic powers in the land. And we've been members of the European Union for the last 40 years. So where has it held us back? Why do we suddenly want to withdraw out of the organisations where we are powerful and we can get a powerful voice across, and somehow think that we'll be more influential if we leave our neighbours alone to go on in some different track?
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a lady here. Can we have a microphone here? Okay, and then we'll go down to the front, and then there's someone there in the middle. Okay, we've got to take questions quickly now. We've literally got 5 minutes. Okay.
Hi. I had a chance to look at some of the literature online about both sides of the argument. And one of the Leave campaign's pieces of literature was 43 years, 43 broken promises. What guarantee can the Stay campaign give us that this won't be number 44?
I haven't seen that document, so I've got no idea whether it's all rubbish, frankly.
Okay.
Can I make a comment? Yeah, I think what is important, nobody on the Leave side can tell you exactly what things will be like after we leave, because nobody can see the future. But Patrick and Margaret cannot tell you what the European Union will be like in 5 years or 10 years, because, as I said earlier, it is on a helter-skelter journey to a United States of Europe. So you're not voting for the status quo, you're voting for a deeply uncertain future in the European Union. There are some uncertainties around the Brexit position, but as I've argued earlier, I believe they are actually relatively small uncertainties.
Okay, we're going to take a question here, okay?
One thing that's annoyed me about the coverage of, obviously, the Brexit in the mainstream media is it's gone very quiet on TTIP, and it's really annoyed me, because the European Union are going to sign us up to this transatlantic trade agreement. It's going to give big American corporations the ability to ride roughshod over this government. And what it'll lead to the privatisation of the NHS. It'll be the coffin lid slamming down on the NHS. And there's hardly any mention of this. Staying in the European Union will be bound to this. And it'll lead to mass privatisation. And that is why I'll be voting for the UK to leave the European Union.
Comments from the panel? No.
Comment.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If we take a gentleman's question there in the middle, and there's a lady at the back. I know you've had your hand up for a bit. Quick questions, please, because we're literally running out of time now.
I'm very concerned that we haven't really dealt with the impact that a leave would have on people's aspirations for the future, particularly young people. Could we have the panel's views on what they think that would mean for residency, travel and study in Europe?
Patrick?
I think it would be much more difficult. And I don't think we can give you... I can't give you an answer to that. I can give you an answer to if we stay in. And I can tell you what it'll be like in 5 years if we stay in. We'll still have the free movement of travel. People will still be able to travel around Europe. And actually, I welcome that. I want those opportunities for people. So that is, I think, very, very important. I think the gentleman who talked about the foundation of the European Union immediately after the war between Germany and France was on the right track, and sometimes we just put that to one side. I think the changes, I mean, the gentleman earlier on that spoke, I think, again, he's an outer, but he spoke about what happened in 1973, and that, but look at Europe, it is completely different from what happened in 1973. Germany had a war that separated it. You were shot for trying to get over that wall. Those barriers have gone down.
Okay, you've all got 2 sentences each to answer, okay?
Can I come back on this? We have British students who are studying around the world. They can study in San Francisco or Singapore or Sydney. They don't face great barriers, nor will they face great barriers in going to the Sorbonne or Strasbourg after we leave the European Union. Equally, we have students coming into Britain from the European Union, but we have large numbers of students coming in from the Middle East and from China. It's a great invisible export for this country. it will continue. Student movement around the world doesn't depend on the EU, otherwise students wouldn't be going outside the EU.
Margaret, quickly.
Basically, I think the answer to your question is it is bound to be more difficult for people. Roger makes these sweeping assertions about how nothing will change, it will all be wonderful, it will all stay the same. He can't justify that, there's no evidence to support it.
You justify the difference then, please.
Okay, Nigel.
It's a risk.
What I would say is that are we going to see free movement of people at all around the European Union? The Schengen Agreement is bust. There will need to be restrictions placed on movement in order that we can deal with some of these issues that we're seeing from migration, but more pertinently from terrorism. Students have always travelled. They will travel all over the world. I don't think those obstacles to going to those countries themselves is going to be hindered by an exit. But certainly free movement of people and free travel of people, I think, is going to be something that changes in any event.
Okay, the lady at the back, right at the back.
Yes, thank you. I'm a little bit concerned that when we did the vote right at the beginning about the numbers of people who were pro and the number of people that were anti-Europe were pretty equal, and yet nearly all of the questions have been from people who are quite clearly anti-Europe. I'm not blaming the panel for that. My concern is that in the middle of the panel, there seems to be a great deal of sort of sound bites, which are just the same sort of things as we've heard Mr. Trump say, you know, we're going to make America great again, without actually saying what he's going to do. And I think in the middle of the panel, there's been, when we leave, we can do what we want. And what I'd like to know is, what is it that we so want to do that we can't do now? And secondly...
Okay, I think...
Sorry,
can you just be very quick?
And secondly, very quickly, the other thing is we're going to take back control of our borders. Now, I travel a lot, and whenever I travel, I'm aware of the fact that I need my passport. I thought we were in control of our borders.
Okay, very quickly.
I've been addressed.
Yes.
Well, we're not in control of our borders in the sense that we're obliged to let in any European citizen without let or hindrance. And as for sound bites, I mean, there's only so much time you can have on the panel, and the chairman, Madam Chairman, is already urging me to be brief. But basically, when we leave, we will have the right to make our own decisions and our own laws in our own Parliament in Westminster, made by people like Patrick that we elect, and if we wish, we can fire at the next election. That is a fundamental difference, as opposed to having laws made by a bureaucracy in a foreign city, where, as I say, we have no control and little influence.
So what law are you so desperate to make? Are you going to take away Working Time Directive or many of the European laws that have protected workers
This may come to you as a surprise. This may come to you as a surprise, but I'm not actually in government, so I can't tell you what laws will change, but you will vote for the people who make those decisions. It will be your choice whom to vote for.
My 17-year-old son, who's had his hand up all night and wanted to be part of this debate, tells me that you are an MEP, and so you were elected as an MEP?
I was indeed, and I want you to vote for me to get my P45, please.
Well, you don't have to stand at the next election, Roger, then you'll get it.
Thank you.
Okay, I am sorry that some people didn't get the opportunity to ask their questions. We have had an hour and a quarter of questions and debate. What I do think is we have had some very interesting, I think, dialogue, but what I don't think we've come to a conclusion is that there's a lot of dialogue still to be had on such an important issue. However, I would like us to thank all of the panel members for their contributions this evening, and can we give them a big round of applause?
And now comes the vote. Well, this vote anyway. Could we do exactly what we did at the start of the evening, please? And could those that still want to remain in Europe put your hands up now?
I was told off before.
Sit down and be counted.
I tell you what, it's been a total entertainment to see Dame Margaret Beckett and Patrick McLoughlin keep nodding their heads when each of them talk.
It won't happen again.
I've been at Derby Telegraph for 10 years. I've never seen that before. Okay. Now can you raise your hands if you want to leave Europe? What I was delighted about actually was that there was an element of young people involved in the latter debate, because one of the questions I will ask in a second, perhaps, of the panel, is how they're going to further this debate. I do think there's a lot of politicised people in this room tonight, but I think a lot of my readers of the Derby Telegraph and of the wider community, I don't think they're involved in the debate at the moment at all, and I think it's really important. It's a big decision on June the 23rd. Right, thank you for that. Now could we go on to the undecideds? That was quite a mass before. Oh, that's few. No, still a few. It's made up a few minds, I think. We all counted up? Okay, perhaps I could ask the panel that actually. The one last question: I mean, this is great tonight that we managed to almost start debate tonight. But how are we going to get the message out there to the wider population? Because I think they feel ill-informed at the moment, and it's really important to have. Thank you. And I think it's a toweringly big decision to make.
Can I answer that? I think that is the big issue. I know very much from talking to our own workforce that they are very disappointed so far about the negative spin that our Prime Minister has put on this. I certainly believe that he, as somebody I admire, by the way, and voted for, he's somebody who should have stayed entirely neutral in this and given us both positions. I think it would be much easier for people to make a decision as a result of that. What we are getting currently is just bombarded by negativity, all the reasons why not, no reasons for, by the government, effectively, with all of the might of the government. And that's very disappointing. Young people particularly, but people of all ages and different positions in business, but also people I'm talking to in the general public, feel very disenfranchised by the whole thing. There's not enough information out there to make them feel that they are able to make the right decision, and that somehow or another we've got to change that. I'm not quite sure how we do it, because as I say, the power of political spin in some respects is the thing that is really capturing all the headlines.
Margaret?
There's going to be lots of events like this, lots of articles written, lots of television programmes, and so on and so on. The thing that I would like to see much more as this discussion goes on and as we get near to the decision is the end of this thing. There are some things which are simply factually wrong, and people shouldn't be saying things that are factually wrong and misleading. And secondly, if people are, and in many of these things, as has been evident this evening, nobody knows. I mean, if it's not something that's factually wrong, like whom actually makes decisions about the law, there are things about what is the likelihood of tariff changes? What are the trade deals likely to be? Nobody knows the answer. Nobody can know the answer. So all any of us can do is to give our best estimate and our best understanding. And I think that this kind of nonsense, and you mentioned spin, Nigel, the biggest spin there is this rubbish about calling it Project Fear if somebody honestly answers a question about what they think might be the disadvantages of leaving the European Union. People have got to be given access to the best information, advice and judgment that people can give. And it's only if that happens, and it's only if people don't try to obstruct that, that we'll actually be able to get a sensible conversation.
Well, Margaret, I agree with some of the things you said about what we're going to be doing. I did think it was a bit over the top when the Prime Minister said that after Brexit there would be plagues of locusts in Britain, but you know, these things will arise, won't they? In terms of what we're doing for what we're doing to communicate, obviously I'm doing much the same things as the other politicians on the panel will be doing, but if I can put in a quick commercial, I do run a blog, and for the last fortnight I've been running on it a thing which I call very originally the Daily Debrief, in which I pick up all the current issues that are in the news overnight and comment on them, and if anybody's interested in taking a look at that and adding their comments to the comment thread, they're very welcome to do so.
And finally, Patrick.
Well, I'm sure you run a very neutral blog, Roger. I think the truth of the matter is as we get closer to the 23rd of June, we're just over 100 days away. I think people's attention will turn more to it. I'm not surprised it's not there yet. There's still almost 3 months, just over 3 months to go. And I hope there is a lively debate, because I think it's good fun, and I congratulate the University of Derby holding this meeting tonight and getting the Derby debate off at the beginning.
I would certainly endorse that, Patrick, in the sense that the University of Derby obviously is reaching out to the young people tonight, and that's absolutely terrific to see. Anyway, you don't want to hear me, you want to know the result, don't you? Jeremy, reveal. Okay, a slight swing to leave then, a lot of applause, but it's not defined, is it? And the undecideds would probably have it in the end, wouldn't they? Anyway, I think it's been a terrific evening, really entertaining, and that is it. Thank you for being a superb audience. Thanks to the panel for being so robust in their arguments. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed.
Is all the Christian point of view and all the history. It begins with the history of the Holy Roman Empire. But my question what would be we can't just say stay in Europe to preserve Scotland.
No. But
as it were.
But it is one of the things that come out.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. But I think, well, it's good to... It was a good mix of questions.
Just when the microphone and she
Thank you for letting us know.
Well done, yes, well done. Yes. What was the slowness getting the sort of first pie chart up?
I got handed.
Oh, you had to type it in. I was.
And then I updated the Excel. I noticed that the pie charts didn't come up. And then
pressure at the moment, isn't it? You know, yes, it was. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I think, I mean, a longer debate in some ways would have been good, but there's only so much you can take. No, well done. You played for it. Is it good for the university? Is it sort of, it seems to be.
Well, I think you need a raise in salary.
I think you need to go on an Excel course.
Anyway.